Fantastic. Cool. Allow me one moment to bring up the notes. I was just off screen reciting the morning chants with you all. All right. Well, thank you all so much for having me here today. I am so happy, first that I have the opportunity to speak with you guys, but also just to see your faces, to feel connected. I mean, we're always interconnected. We always interexist with other beings, but it's so nice to see your faces again in the temple that I consider, my heart temple. So I'm really happy to be here. And like Hung Su said, my Dharma name is Tongjin Su, but you can also call me by my given name, which is Caleb. So today is the spring equinox, right? Today we're celebrating the return of the sun once again in the Northern Hemisphere, the beginning of spring, the beginning of the season of light. So as I was reflecting on what I might speak about, I reflected on how shortly after the fall equinox, I gave a talk called Great Earth Sangha, which was an ecological take on what the Sangha is. Today, I'd like to speak on an ecological take on Dharma. But before I begin, I'd like actually to continue Hung Su's habit of making a few comments on the Prajnaparamita Hridaya Sutra, because I'm going to speak about Dharma today, right? And there's that line in the Heart Sutra that all Dharmas are empty. They are not born nor annihilated. They are not defiled nor immaculate. They do not increase nor decrease. And I think the line, all dharmas are empty, can be a little confusing. When we say that all dharmas are empty, it does not refer to the teachings of the Buddha. We are not saying that everything the Buddha taught is empty, although the Buddha taught emptiness. So in this context, it's actually a technical term used in the philosophical side of our tradition. And roughly a dharma or dharmas means the constituent elements that make up the world, kind of like atoms or molecules. You could think of dharmas as, literally it means all existent things, and they are the basic building blocks of the universe, like little Lego pieces, which comprise many things. You can disassemble them and they can comprise more things. So to say that these dharmas, these atoms are empty, they are not born nor annihilated, means that all existent things are empty of any intrinsic self. There is no essential core to any dharma, anything we can point to and locate its essence. For instance, there is no core part to my cushion that comprises its cushionness, right? There's no single kernel in my, I think, buckwheat that you can point to and say, oh, this is where the core of the cushion lies, right? So that's why all dharmas are empty. So as I said, today's the spring equinox, but I also learned that today is considered the International Day of Happiness, perhaps due to the optimistic way we all feel around this time of year, now that days are lengthening, plants are growing, and the world around us is waking up. Like I said, last autumn, I gave a talk called The Great Earth Sangha, and within it, I discussed an ecological view of the Sangha, which are traditionally the community of practitioners who follow the Buddha. So throughout the talk and our reading of Dogen, we learned how mountains, rivers, trees, and animals, the inhabitants of the more than human world, can inform our practice. Calling them the Great Earth Sangha, we examined how relating with these beings and viewing them as members of our spiritual community can help us expand our perspective, cutting through our human-centered view of things. And Dogen described viewing the earth from our typical human-centered perspective, like viewing the sky from one end of a hollowed out bamboo stick, right? It's a very narrow way to take things in. But viewing things from the perspective of a fish, the sun, a river, or a mountain, we might cut through some delusion and begin to see the world with fresh eyes, free of the associations we attach to things. Instead, we simply see the flower, or see the tree, or see the river, not our own associations, regrets, memories, or perhaps the thing's utility for human life. So today I'd like to talk more specifically about some lessons we can learn about this relationship with the greater Sangha. So what might the more than human world teach us, right? Today, the title, therefore, of this talk today is Great Earth Dharma. So let's begin with a definition. The Dharma is the second of our three jewels, after Buddha and before Sangha. In Sanskrit, Dharma means universal truth. It comes from the root word dr, meaning to bear or to support. It has multiple connotations and meanings. First, there is a more cosmic connotation. Primarily, Dharma means universal truth with a capital T. And here, Dharma implies a universal law that governs the universe morally and physically. It is that by which the universe is borne up and supported. So in Like Milk and Water Mixed, Sravasti Dhammika says, according to Buddhist understanding, in some ways the Dharma is a bit like gravity. Sir Isaac Newton did not invent gravity. He realized that such a phenomenon existed, understood how it functioned, then explained it and gave it a name. Had he never been born, there still would have been someone who would have discovered it at one time or another. The knowledge of gravity ever comes to be lost, misunderstood, or distorted, someone will eventually rediscover it. Likewise, Dharma has always existed and always will. Someone who realizes it and proclaims it to the world is called a Buddha. The Dharma, as we have known it for the last 2.5 millennia, whether it's the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, or all its auxiliary doctrines, were realized by the Indian prince Siddhartha Gautama. If in the distant future this Dharma is forgotten or lost, someone will eventually rediscover it. So this connotation of Dharma means this universal law with a capital L, right? But generally when we use the term, Dharma just means the totality of what the Buddha taught. We could think of this as the Buddha's articulation of that law. And I think that's the way we most often use it in our Sangha. So within all Buddhist traditions, it's very common to say that the Buddha gave 84,000 teachings, which is a number not to be taken literally, but metaphorically, because it implies that the Buddha gave many different teachings because there are many different beings and different methods and teachings will resonate with different people. So as such, we have a wealth of texts, a wealth of dharmas we can turn to, whether it's the Heart Sutra, the Dhammapada, a book by Thich Nhat Hanh, or the Sin Sin Ming. Each text may have a different author, but they're all Dharma. They're all folded into the whole of Buddha's teachings. So, and then like I said, there's the third connotation that's used technically in philosophical debates. So we'll focus today on the second definition, Dharma as teachings of the Buddha. So what teachings can the great earth impart to us? So initially, I thought of the nature metaphors we often employ when talking about meditation. For instance, we often refer to the mind as a clear blue sky. And the thoughts that pass through the mind are likened to puffy clouds drifting through that sky. We're often reminded there's no need to fixate on the clouds, but just let them pass, let them drift through, and embrace the expansive nature of our mind, which is much like the expansive nature of the sky. Sometimes the mind is likened to a great ocean with waves rolling across the surface. The waves are our thoughts. They're choppy and rough, but below the surface, the water remains quite still, even though there may be a storm above. Shunryu Suzuki once said of meditation, it appears as if something comes from outside your mind, but actually it is only the waves of your mind. If you are not bothered by the waves, gradually they will become calmer and calmer. So here we see how the more than human world gives us at least two different ways of understanding ourselves, the nature of our minds, and our practice. These windows into the mind and its behavior require contact with the sky, and with water to understand them, right? So we can ground them in our everyday experiences. For instance, we can spend a day at Lake Michigan on either a stormy day or a calm day and perhaps understand a little bit more about ourselves in our practice. We can look up and gaze at the expanse of our Midwestern sky and sense the spaciousness of our own mind. Taking one step further, the more than human world can also illustrate and concretize doctrines like impermanence, emptiness, and interpenetration. And in fact, awakening to these awarenesses is a thoroughly ecological experience. For instance, we can witness impermanence in the yearly cycle from spring to summer, summer to fall, fall to winter, and all over again. Today, we stand on an important threshold in that cycle. Now we can watch as trees bud and bloom, grow leaves, create fruit, and then cast them aside in the fall, standing bare, naked, and exposed all winter. Butterflies and bees this time of year will feed on flowers bursting into bloom right now, but by fall and winter, these brief and beautiful blooms will die away. Days grow longer from solstice to solstice, light lengthens and positivity strengthens. Then the days grow short again from solstice to solstice. Light is cut short and decay prevails. All things proceed in this cycle, year after year, always expressing the truth that this too shall pass, right? Whether this means a beautiful sunny day in July or the coldest, longest, most bitter winter night in January. Samsara literally means the cycle of existence. Therefore, samsara is exactly this cycle we see unfold in the world over and over and over. In the way of the Bodhisattva, Shantideva says, the wanton lord of death we can't predict, and life's tasks done or still to do we cannot stay. And whether ill or well, we cannot trust our lives, our fleeting momentary lives. And we must pass away, forsaking all. But I, devoid of understanding, have for sake of friend and foe alike provoked and brought about so many evils. My enemies at length will cease to be, my friends and I myself will cease to be, and all is likewise destined for destruction. Perhaps a little bit of a dark sentiment, but this realization of the impermanence of things, of the destruction destined for all of us, ought to awaken in us the urgent need to practice, to wake up while we still have the time. Secondly, we can also comprehend emptiness when observing and interacting with the Great Earth Sangha. The Sanskrit word for emptiness is shunyata. When we say emptiness, we do not mean something nihilistic. We mean that all things are empty of a concrete self. They are empty of any special substance. Everything expresses emptiness because every entity, in fact, relies on everything else to exist. For example, we can experience emptiness in the way we rely upon the earth for our food. Think of plants. They are created from sunlight, soil, minerals, and water. They create fruits, vegetables, and seeds from these constituent elements, which we then take into our being when we eat. Now the sunlight, the soil, the minerals, and the water that comprise the plant comprise our being. Physically, our being is made up of everything we have eaten. Every 7 years, you are physically composed of a completely different set of cells than you were 7 years prior. And we all know that everything we eat eventually returns to the earth when we use the bathroom. We are empty of a permanent self because we are always changing, always eating, always taking aspects of plants, trees, and animals into our being, and then releasing those same aspects back to the earth from whence they all came. You could also think of emptiness as being visible in a river. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus once said, "No one ever steps in the same river twice." Why? We may think that looking at a river, that it is a fixed thing, a permanent thing. You see them on maps, right? Doesn't look like their position is moving. But take the Grand River, for instance. the water that flows through it is always moving, always flowing toward Lake Michigan. And where does this water come from? This water has fallen from the sky via rain clouds. And those clouds in turn came from evaporation, which in turn came from water that fell from the sky, which in turn, right? The water cycle flows over and over again, endlessly. And we can step into the river, but the water we step in itself is always different. Everything's in flux and flow, and the river teaches us this. The river is empty of itself because there's no single thing we can point to as being the river, but it is there and it still flows. The last lesson that we can learn from our Great Earth Sangha is interconnectedness. This is something already implied by impermanence and the nature of emptiness. Thich Nhat Hanh calls it interbeing, and in the Huayan school, it is called interpenetration. All beings, all phenomena are deeply connected, co-arise together, and contain all other beings, all other phenomena. The sun, the moon, the stars, the trees, the animals, the mountains, the rivers, yourself, myself, we are all woven together in one web of life, one interdimensional network. In the Avatamsaka Sutra, this interpenetration is described by Indra's net. The Indian god Indra is said to have a net of celestial jewels that extend infinitely in all directions. And the first patriarch of Huayan, Dushun, described it saying, because of the clarity of the jewels, they were reflected in and enter into each other ad infinitum. Within each jewel simultaneously is reflected the whole net, and ultimately nothing comes or goes. If we now turn to the southwest, we can pick one particular jewel and examine it closely. This individual jewel can immediately reflect the image of every other jewel. As is the case with this jewel, this is furthermore the case with all the rest of the jewels. Each and every jewel simultaneously and immediately reflects each and every other ad infinitum. And we can see this reflection constantly in the universe. The human eye resembles a nebula. Cells resemble stars. Trees resemble human bodies. And your face resembles my own. My face resembles even a cat's, you could say. Dogen talks about this deep interpenetration of worlds and beings in the Mountain and River Sutra, saying, it is not only that there is water in the world, but there is a world in water. It is not just in water. There's also a world of sentient beings in the clouds, in the air, in fire, on earth, in all over the phenomenal world. There is even a world of sentient beings in a single blade of grass. Wherever there is a world of sentient beings, there is a world of Buddha ancestors. This realization of our interconnection, our interbeing with all other beings should summon compassion from us because we are all in this together. The Tibetan poet Milarepa said, the notion of emptiness engenders compassion. It's one of my favorite things I've ever heard anyone say. The notion of emptiness engenders compassion. Why? Because if I am empty of a self, only reflecting everything else, then it means that my joy is also your joy, and your joy, or I don't even know what I said, and your pain is my pain, and vice versa, right? Shantideva says, the hand and other limbs are many and distinct, but all are one body to be kept and guarded. Likewise, different beings in their joys and sorrows are all like me, all one in wanting happiness. My pain does not, in fact, afflict or cause discomfort to another's body. Through clinging to my ego, my I, this suffering is mine, and being mine is very hard to bear. And other beings' pain I do not feel, and yet, because I take them for my own, their suffering is likewise hard to bear. This truth of interbeing or interpenetration provides the motivation to fulfill our bodhisattva vows, to liberate ourselves and all beings from suffering. So let's wrap it up. We see that the concepts we read about in Dharma teachings and in sutras are expressed phenomenally in the more than human world, whether it's the nature of mind, impermanence, emptiness, or interconnection. Dogen takes this one step further. In one of the chapters of the Shobogenzo called Bukkyo, Dogen suggests that mountains and rivers, the very body of the earth, is a sutra. He says what has been called the sutras is the whole universe in the 10 directions itself. There is no time or place that is not the sutras. They use the words and letters of the heavens above and the human world. They use the words and letters of the world of animals and the words of angry demons. They use the words and letters of 100 weeds and the 10,000 trees. Dogen is saying that the sutras capture what is already being expressed every single moment by the whole of the universe, whether it is the natural state of mind, emptiness, impermanence, or interconnection. All Buddhist concepts can be learned in the natural world. So let's think back to our 2 definitions of Dharma with which we began this talk. I said that Dharma can be teachings, or Dharma can mean universal law. Let's weave those together. Dharma as teachings articulate the universal law, right? Dharmas speak of Dharma. We could think of sutras as the Buddha's spoken or written articulation of the law. The great earth too speaks of that law by being it, by being Dharma. Our talk is called Great Earth Dharma because the great earth is Dharma. Guro Nishijima, a 20th century Zen priest, summed it up saying, Buddhism is basically a religion of belief in the universe, and nature is the universe showing its real form. So to look at nature is to look at Buddhist truth itself. For this reason, Master Dogen believed that nature is just Buddhist scriptures. Well, that is the conclusion of what I have to offer today. I'm not sure if we have time to take questions. Otherwise, it's time for a meditation. Yes, meditate. Cool. Thank you.